The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, unremarkable on the outside but carrying the faint scent of printer ink. Inside, a statement from the Homeowners Association detailed fees that didn't make sense. The homeowner, Ryan Carter, stared at the numbers with a growing sense of unease. He was used to monthly HOA dues and occasional reminders about community guidelines. But this was different. Buried among the routine charges were multiple maintenance violations he'd never heard of. Each one was for a small amount, not enough to trigger alarm on its own. But together they formed a sum large enough to hurt. Ryan lived in Brookside Estates, a seemingly idyllic suburban community where neat lawns and freshly painted shutters masked the tension beneath. The HOA had always been strict but predictable, operating under a veneer of transparency. Yet as he flipped through months of previous statements, Ryan realized the fines had been appearing for nearly a year, tucked between line items in small print. He had simply overlooked them before. A creeping sense of betrayal formed in his stomach. He recalled how the HOA president, Marlene Grant, liked to boast about running the association by the book. She was a tall, sharp-featured woman who wore crisp suits even to casual board meetings. Her reputation for being meticulous and relentless preceded her. If someone had crossed a line in the neighborhood, she would be the first to notice. But Ryan couldn't recall any incident that would justify these fines. His lawn was immaculate, his exterior paint within code, his mailbox regulation-sized. He began a quiet investigation of his own. He printed all his statements from the HOA portal and created a spreadsheet mapping the mysterious charges over time. Patterns emerged. Each fine coincided with periods when Marlene had been traveling or otherwise distracted, suggesting someone else in the office might have been handling billing. But the digital signatures authorizing the charges were all hers. Ryan's research led him to the association's bylaws, a dense PDF full of legal jargon and outdated policies. Hidden within the financial section, he found a clause about discretionary fines for repeated violations, but nothing about how these fines should be communicated. There was also no limit to how many could be levied before official notice had to be given. This loophole, he realized, was a perfect hiding place for small, unauthorized charges. He decided to cross-check with his neighbors. A few casual conversations revealed nothing. Either people weren't paying attention or they feared retaliation. Brookside Estates had a reputation for subtle punishment, letters, citations, and mysterious delays in permit approvals for those who complained too loudly. Ryan felt the weight of isolation pressing down on him, but knew he had to continue. The deeper he went, the stranger it became. He noticed that nearly all the board members were close friends or business associates of Marlene. Her brother-in-law was listed as the HOA's maintenance contractor. Her childhood friend managed landscaping bids. Even the auditor the HOA claimed to use was a small firm operating out of a P.O. box 2 towns over. One evening, Ryan sat at his kitchen table, the glow of his laptop illuminating the stack of papers beside him. His investigation had become an obsession. Every receipt, every record, every faint clue was logged and scrutinized. He wasn't just uncovering his own fines now. He was piecing together a map of potential financial misconduct. As his frustration built, he began to see Marlene's influence everywhere. She had convinced the community years ago that strict enforcement kept property values high. People believed her because she was relentless in her speeches and presentations, always armed with data and charts. But Ryan suspected the charts were as carefully engineered as the charges on his bill. He decided to test the system. He sent a polite formal request to the HOA office asking for an itemized breakdown of his fines. The response was swift but vague. A pre-written template claiming the charges were for ongoing compliance issues without specifying what they were. The signature line bore Marlene's name. That night, Ryan felt the first true surge of anger. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. He began gathering evidence like a detective preparing for trial. Screenshots, emails, even photographs of his own property to prove compliance. He stored everything on an encrypted drive, anticipating that someone might try to erase the paper trail. 2 weeks later, a letter appeared in his mailbox marked urgent. The HOA was threatening legal action for non-payment of fines. Ryan's heart raced as he realized the stakes had escalated. They weren't backing down. They were doubling down. He read the letter twice, then 3 times. Instead of fear, something colder settled in him, a determination to fight back. At night, the streetlights cast long shadows across the pristine lawns of Brookside Estates. Ryan walked his property line, thinking about how something as small as a hidden fee could unravel the illusion of community trust. He imagined Marlene sitting in her office, confident in her power, unaware that someone had noticed her scheme. He knew the next step would be riskier, obtaining internal HOA documents not available to the public. He also knew he couldn't do it alone. As Chapter 1 closes, Ryan is on the verge of uncovering something explosive. He has gathered enough evidence to suspect corruption at the very top of the HOA, but still lacks the proof to expose it. He stares at his laptop screen late into the night, a single folder labeled Evidence pulsing like a secret waiting to be unleashed. Ryan's plan took shape in quiet increments. He began attending every HOA board meeting, sitting silently in the back, taking notes. The meetings were open to residents, but few attended. Most preferred to skim the monthly newsletter instead. Marlene ran the meetings with a clipped efficiency, sliding through agenda items and cutting off dissent before it gained momentum. Ryan watched her closely, noting how she controlled the flow of discussion. He also began filing formal records requests, citing his rights as a paying member of the association. Each time, he received partial documents or delayed responses, but small details slipped through. An expense report showing duplicate payments, a maintenance invoice billed at double the usual rate, a landscaping contract renewed without competitive bidding. Each fragment added to his growing puzzle. He realized he needed a larger platform to expose Marlene's actions. A quiet confrontation would be brushed aside, but a public revelation could not be ignored. He contacted a local investigative journalist known for covering municipal scandals. After a cautious exchange of emails, they agreed to meet in a neutral location. The journalist listened as Ryan laid out his evidence. She asked pointed questions, testing the credibility of his claims. He handed over copies of his documents, his spreadsheets, and even photographs. Her eyes widened at the patterns emerging from his files. She promised to dig deeper, using her press credentials to access records he could not. While she worked, Ryan prepared his neighbors. Without naming specifics, he began talking about financial irregularities at HOA meetings, urging others to review their own statements. Some brushed him off, but a few came forward with their own unexplained finds. The collective grievance began to snowball. Weeks passed. Tension simmered in the community. Marlene's confident demeanor at meetings began to crack as residents whispered and exchanged glances. Ryan knew the pressure was mounting. He kept his routine steady, avoiding overt conflict while quietly fueling the fire. Then one morning, the journalist called him with news. She had uncovered bank records showing a pattern of transfers from the HOA's account to a shell company registered under Marlene's maiden name. The amounts matched the unexplained fines Ryan had documented. It was the proof he needed. Together, they planned a coordinated release. The journalist would publish her story online, and Ryan would present his evidence at the next HOA board meeting, where residents could see the truth for themselves. The timing had to be perfect to prevent Marlene from retaliating or covering her tracks. The night of the meeting arrived like a storm front. The community center was packed with more residents than Ryan had ever seen. The air buzzed with low murmurs and the smell of coffee. Marlene appeared at the podium, her usual crisp suit immaculate, but her hands gripping the lectern just a little too tightly. Ryan waited until the financial report segment before standing. Without accusation or theatrics, he presented his evidence on a projector he had reserved in advance. Spreadsheet after spreadsheet, photograph after photograph, the pattern became undeniable. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the amounts were read aloud, linked to Marlene's shell company. Marlene attempted to cut him off, but the residents erupted in protest. The journalist, seated in the back, recorded everything. Ryan felt the room tilt as years of quiet resentment boiled over. Neighbors who had once stayed silent now shouted questions, demanding accountability. The board called an emergency recess, but the damage was done. By the next morning, The journalist's article went live, complete with bank records, internal emails, and interviews with residents. Social media picked up the story, framing it as a classic tale of suburban corruption. Local news stations sent camera crews to Brookside Estates. Marlene resigned within days. An interim board was appointed and a forensic audit was launched. Preliminary findings confirmed widespread mismanagement of funds, with potential criminal charges pending. Residents who had been fined illegally were issued refunds, and the HOA pledged to rewrite its bylaws to close the loopholes Ryan had discovered. Ryan watched the fallout unfold with a mix of relief and exhaustion. His once quiet neighborhood was now a cautionary tale for every other HOA in the county. Yet despite the chaos, he felt a deep sense of vindication. He had taken on a system built to intimidate and won. In the months that followed, Brookside Estates began to change. Meetings became more transparent. Budgets were posted online. Residents voted on contracts and proposals. A new culture of openness replaced the old regime of secrecy and fear. Ryan found himself nominated for a board position but declined, preferring to stay an engaged observer rather than a direct participant. On a quiet evening in spring, Ryan sat on his porch sipping coffee as the sun dipped below the rooftops. The lawns still gleamed, the houses still stood in perfect rows, but something intangible had shifted. The neighborhood was no longer just a collection of homes. It was a community that had learned to stand up for itself. As Chapter 2 closes, the story ends with Ryan reflecting on the cost and reward of his crusade. The fight against hidden corruption had been draining, but it had restored a sense of integrity to the place he called home. Brookside Estates had been changed forever, and so had he.